Someone asked me to discuss emotion after awakening. So, as I described in the book, and if you haven't read it, you might want to take a look because the chapter on emotions is going to go into a lot more detail than I can on a video. But in the book, I describe emotions as being on a sort of spectrum from pre-awakening through awakening to liberation, and that the way people perceive emotion dramatically shifts and changes throughout that process. Moreover, when I talk to somebody about emotion, the first thing I always do is try to discern how they experience emotion. What is an emotion to you? So as a starting place, it can be helpful actually to ask yourself, what is an emotion to me? You might start with a logical or cognitive definition and then try to go a bit deeper and ask yourself, what underlies that definition for myself in my own experience? What happens when I'm feeling an emotion? What is actually going on? What part of it is a felt experience in the body? And what part of it is a story, a narrative? What seemed to cause the emotion? Who the emotion seems to involve? Whether it's just me or whether it's another party or groups of people. How do the emotions come about? Do they come spontaneously? Do they seem to start in a narrative or story and move into a physical experience? Or vice versa? So these questions I'm asking now are not ones to really answer with thought, but to answer by following the experience when you feel an emotion, whether it's anger, sadness, joy, elation, jealousy, resentment, shame. Look closely when you have these experiences. These moments are gold mines. We often overlook them because we tend to shoot right up into our head, especially with emotions like helplessness, shame, grief. So we tend to distract into thoughts and then distract outwardly often. But if we just take a few minutes to use this opportunity to explore our emotion body and see where does that emotion seem to start? Where does it come from? Where is it arising from? Is it in the body? Is it in the gut, in the chest, in the throat, in the head? Does it seem to be coming from outside, from another person or a situation? And if so, how do you know that? Is it because of what you're feeling? Or is it because of what the thoughts are saying? So this way of exploring emotions and just asking open-ended questions, but really trying to look for the answers, trying to pinpoint where exactly an emotion arises, where it becomes a story, a narrative, or where it becomes a physical experience if it seemed to start as a narrative or story. It's like following the money. And with emotions specifically, this kind of process can be quite valuable. One of the least effective ways of working with emotions is to intellectualize. Because intellectualizing is exactly what keeps us repressing emotions, avoiding emotions, not even noticing we're feeling emotions. So there's not a need to push thoughts away or make them wrong, but just know the way of mental analysis is not particularly helpful in this arena. So as I described earlier, there's a spectrum of emotional experience that I see people tend to fall on. And as this process unfolds, they tend to move toward the farther end of that spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, emotions are like stories. They're like narratives. They're very heady, often not located in the body, or seemingly located in the body. They tend to be interactive with other people. They tend to involve interacting with others. And as we start to feel into what the emotion actually is, it tends to be a bit more of an internal experience. It may still involve others or situations outside. It may still have a narrative, but there's a physical component to it. It's closer. You can find it in the body. And then at some point, there's even a deeper clarity with this, to where the emotional experience is primarily physical. It's primarily a sensation, and perhaps even a non-dualistic sensation, which means a sensation that is so close that you can't actually talk about where it is. It may be experienced as the body and the environment simultaneously. This is a much more intimate experience of an emotion. It may still have a label, on occasion even a narrative, but it's largely a physical experience. Once we experience emotions this way, they become a lot less of a challenge as far as putting us in our head, as far as avoidance, repression. With that said, it's still valuable to do some inquiry around emotion, because the tendency to avoid, the tendency to cognize, to go upward into the head, can be very strong for certain emotions, and it can last for a long time. And it ends up being tied into our identity structures. So without realizing it, we can be pushing something away, even though we feel like largely our attention is able to rest in the body or in the senses or in the physical centers that this emotion is associated with. This is a common discussion I have with people in deeper stages of realization, and that is they still recognize these energy centers, emotion centers, remaining in the body that feel fixated, that the story has cleared, the blame has cleared largely, and they're able to experience these movements of energy, this energy in motion or emotion, clearly and directly, and yet they still sense that there's something holding or pushing away or fixated around a center in the head, the chest, the gut. These energy densities or contractions require a subtle sort of inquiry to recognize what the root of resistance actually is. It becomes less about a story or a narrative in our life or a situation and a physical response to it than it is about an attachment to or an identification with the physical body, the physicality of being in this physical body separated from a physical world. So the kinds of inquiry that can help with this are varied. But one is to recognize wherever this energy center is. It might be felt as pain, it might be felt as a contraction or a density. And when we feel this, when we experience it directly, just resting in that is okay and often does the work. But if we still perceive something, holding, avoiding, holding distance, then the type of inquiry that can be helpful is this. We can ask ourselves, with this sensation, say it's in the chest, is there something that seems to be aware of it that's apart from it? And you have to look directly for this. Where is the perception that I am something aware of this? That the space of awareness, the space of knowing or self or I am, is somehow apart from this sensation, right? It's almost as if you walk into a room with 150 objects in it, but there's one object you're completely aware of, and that one's getting all your attention. It's that kind of holding. That there's nothing wrong with it. You know there's nothing wrong with that sensation. You know the story isn't really true. Any story that arises about it's not quite true, and yet the fixation seems to be there, but you're not sure what to do with it. So now we're inquiring into the view that's held in reference to it. The subtle view, the subtle self view. And the view really is rooted in the sense that I'm a body, that I'm a physical being. Which might sound like something you don't want to get rid of, but at this level of realization, it's imperative to look into it. So look for the view. Look for, is there a view holder? Is there a place apart? Is there a separate awareness from the sensation or experience? And you just look around for it. That's it. Don't expect to find it. Don't figure out what to do when you don't find it. Just keep looking until it's very, very clear that there is nothing apart from anything else. It should start feeling quite non-dual. This energy center should feel as non-dualistic as music or sound when you're completely immersed and not thinking of self at all. And there's no sense of contraction. So we're looking for the dualistic mechanism. And it's critical that this is not a cognitive endeavor. Because if it is, you're probably better just to rest your attention in the sensation. But once you're able to do that, and there's still a sense of holding, contraction, separation, then you can start to look into this very subtle view. I might call it a subtle self view. And the looking is what's helpful, what's important. Now, you can also approach this by asking, what are my hidden beliefs about this? This approach I'm a little more cautious to discuss because if you're prone to going up into your head and to analysis easily, then maybe not this for now. But if you can stay in the presence, in the sensation, in the space of I am without intellectualizing anything, then this can be really helpful. Because you can ask, what are my beliefs about this? What beliefs about this remain? Or what beliefs about this are functioning in the background? And then just look, feel into it, see what comes. It has to come from the experience itself. And if it does, it's often something like, that shouldn't be here. I don't want that. And when that belief crystallizes, if it does, then just be willing to be okay with that belief itself. Not making distance from the belief. Seeing what it's actually made of, which is the same thing everything is made of in this space, consciousness. If you're able to just find a very neutral place there, you might notice things calm down dramatically. So that approach can also be helpful. A third approach is to cycle your attention through the sense gates, through sound, noticing the non-dualistic nature of sound, which means it's not somewhere else coming to a me here and being received. There's no subject or object in sound. The subject and object are an afterthought. Sound just is. And if you have that access, if that's clear to you, then you can just remind yourself experientially how that is. And then cycle attention to the sense field, the physical sense, the body sense. And you may notice the same quality of non-locatability. It may be subtle at first, may not be obvious, but by comparing through experience, it may clarify that way as well. You can do the same with the visual field, or a sensation in a different part of the body that doesn't feel attached to a body image or a location at all. Could be the tingles in the hands, and obviously the term hands and the labels are just so that I can point you there. But if you can recognize the non-dualistic nature there, where there becomes nowhere specific, and see if that doesn't also apply to the energetic density, the center, the contraction. You might start to notice the interpenetration of the senses, the interpenetration of the vivid sense fields. So those are a few ways to work with emotion at the root or fundamental level. Because beyond that, it really is non-dual. And in non-dual, especially when there's clear equanimity, then the experience of emotion is fundamentally different. I wouldn't say that one does not feel emotion, but that sort of depends on how you define it. I would say that the channels are open and the energy moving through as the body-mind responds fluidly to all experiences is unhindered. There's nothing creating an identity apart from it. So it can metabolize naturally and it becomes enjoyable. It just becomes part of the field of self-responsive experience. It doesn't become that. That's all it ever was. And it becomes joyful to feel everything move through. And there's no labels. There's no distinct labels for specific emotions most of the time. And from there on, the experience itself, which is a 0-point experience, not a spatial experience, carries itself into deeper and deeper clarity.